Hello and welcome to the Blood and Pigment channel. Today we're talking about some strategy and tactics for playing Blood and Plunder well. I'm Joseph and I'm joined by Dan and Guy. What part of the game are we looking at today, Dan?
Fatigue management. Fatigue represents diminished morale, exhaustion, or disorganization in Blood and Plunder. Guy, how does fatigue affect your units in the game?
Fatigue does the following. When you have one fatigue, it does nothing. When you have two fatigue, the unit loses an action. When the unit has 3 fatigue to 6 fatigue, it loses an action and must do a dedicated rally when you activate it. And if a unit ever has 7 fatigue, it is eliminated by routing.
That's bad.
Being eliminated is always bad in a war game. I think the Book of Wargaming has something to that effect.
If thou shalt loseth thine most prized unit, bail. In my case, the Anthroplogues.
But they wouldn't do that. They would never get fatigue.
So to play the game well, you need to keep fatigue off your units and put fatigue on the enemy units. Controlling fatigue is controlling the game, and if you control the game, you should win.
Yeah, most people know this, but you get fatigue by either doing more than you should, by pushing in stuff, or by getting shot at. Every time you get shot at or a hit lands on your unit, you're going to have to take some sort of a number of fatigue checks against your morale, and that's how you get fatigue. So you want to get fatigue on your enemies and keep fatigue off your units. And there's some key ways you can leverage. Once you get fatigue on your enemy units, you not only deprive them of actions. If they have 2 fatigue, they don't get one of their actions every time they activate, which can be a big deal. If you make them shaken, then they pretty much lose their whole turn, not just to action, but their whole activation. They have to rally, do a dedicated rally just to get back in the game, giving you another chance to hit them. And if you get enough fatigue on them, you just flat out knock them out of the game. And if you get more actions than your enemy, you're generally going to be able to shoot them more and win the games.
We should mention too that the most units in Blood and Plunder are not eliminated by getting shot. They're not eliminated by being run through with a sword. Most units in this game run away by routing because they have too much fatigue.
After they've been whittled down to just a couple models, usually, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's the death knell of units, is that there's only 2 of them and they have 4 fatigue. So the whole unit runs away.
I got a fun little observation here. That 2 fatigue basically drops them down an experience level temporarily, if you think about it.
It's even worse than that, really. Sometimes because you can't push once you have 2 fatigues, so that limits you.
You can't use spades if you're not a veteran.
Yeah, because you just have to rally. Yeah, it's rough. So there's kind of 2 things I want to focus on here. 1, how do you keep fatigue off your units, keep your force moving at high efficiency? And then 2, how do you put lots of fatigue on your opponent to deprive them to not let them play the game? So most of these methods are in the form of special rules that are attached to either a commander or a force or a unit. What are some of the favorite rules on commanders, Dan?
We have 2 of the most common ones, being inspiring and very inspiring. Inspiring means that while the commander's unit is active, all friendly units within his command range may reroll any failed rally test results, again, while he's active. Very inspiring is the upgraded version. It means that everybody who's in his bubble, even if he's not active, gets to reroll those failed rally saves.
Inspiring is on a lot of the generic commanders, especially the militia commanders. Pretty useful. A lot of people want to pay the 15 points just to get that rule. And very inspiring pretty much shows up on the historic, mostly the legendary commanders. And that's really powerful. Pretty much every rally, you're going to get 90% or 70 or 80% at least of your fatigue off.
Lets you shed all that fatigue. It's nice.
Another couple of rules that help are vendetta. Vendetta always targets another nation, so that they're really good at fighting that nation. A few commanders have it. The pirates, Gene Hamlin, I think, has it. Vendetta against somebody. The way it works is you get to re-roll 1 failed die on a rally test. Unlike Inspiring, where it's all, or Very Inspiring, you just get to re-roll 1. It's pretty good still. Often, if you're only rolling 2 rallies, likelihood of getting one success and one fail is pretty high. So it's pretty close, but not as good. But it's often for your whole force instead of only when your commander is rallying. So it can be pretty effective, but it's a little more rare in the game. Although it does pop up a little more in Fire on the Frontier, where you have nations that really hated each other. You guys use Vendetta ever?
I have. It's fun when it activates.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because you have to take it. If you don't know who you're going to go up, it might be a big fat nothing. Determination is another unusual one. It's only found really on Spanish forces because it replaces Ruthless, which we'll talk about in a bit, with Tough, which we'll talk about in a bit too. Tough is the most common, really strong fatigue management ability, or you get to take a fatigue off at the end of your activation if you haven't done anything crazy. So giving your whole replacing Ruthless with Tough makes all your units shed fatigue regularly, which is pretty powerful. So there's one commander or one or two Spanish commanders that apply this to the
Peralta.
whole force. Yeah, Peralta, which you see in the Pacific Adventure organized play.
It's really nice to complement a lot of these Spanish abilities with Tough, because it isn't something that you usually expect to fight Marineros or Milicianos that are tough.
Yeah.
The next one is Indomitable. It used to be rare, but it showed up on the Unknown African. So now anybody who plays Brotherhood of the Coast, English Buccaneers, or French Buccaneers has access to it. And it removes a fatigue when the unit is activated, and can, if the unit started shaken, reduce them to unshaken for their activation, which is kind of big.
Oh, yeah.
Because the unit activates, if it started with 2 fatigue, even though it would go down to 1, the unit still loses that activation. Activating a unit when they have 2 fatigue will always reduce those activations, even with Indomitable. But you really won't have that much trouble with fatigue with Indomitable. The Unknown African and Piet Hein are the ones that have Indomitable, and both of them are great at managing fatigue.
I was just looking at my super secret version of Raise the Black, and there's 4 commanders in that have Indomitable.
Oh, nice. It's a little bit spread out. Another fatigue management ability that is a little bit more common than Indomitable is Lead by Example, that shows up on a lot of Buccaneers. And it's really hard to trigger. What it does is, if the unit that has it eliminates and this is always on commanders, if the unit that's attached to it eliminates an enemy unit either by an attack or by routing, then the whole force gets to pull 1 fatigue off. Pretty powerful, except making it happen is really hard. Now, it does work with cannons. If you have cannon shooting and you manage to eliminate it with your commander, then you still get to pull that fatigue. I've only done this myself once, and I played a lot of Buccaneer commanders. Most of the time, to me, Lead by Example just reads blank because it's so rare.
You can kind of build around it, make your command unit real big, or use a bunch of
really deadly
Buccaneers or something with a really good shoot, and just try to focus fire. You use your 2 auxiliary units with a command point to shoot at the unit, and then try to finish them off with the command unit. You can build around it, but yeah, in general, it's not really easy to take advantage of.
Kind of just a nice thing that happens, and
it's really nice when it happens. It can be a big game swing.
So now we have probably the most common one, which is Tough. Tough is very common. It can be applied to any unit with a grizzled veteran, a set of Neptune, or a lot of historic commanders. And then essentially what happens at the end of activation, so long as you did not push, you knock off a point of fatigue. And it's great. Another one that is kind of uncommon is Unwavering. Is if you start shaking, you take off one point of fatigue and you activate normally. It's like Indomitable, but not as good. It's like when you say, "Hey, Mom, I want some Indomitable," and she says, "I have Indomitable at home." You have Unwavering.
Another small rule, but it can be meaningful if you want to do a lot of melee fighting, is the Battle Hardened special rule. This decreases the amount of resolve dice you have to roll when you are attacked in a melee. So a charge or a fight action, you don't scare off as easy. The European soldiers have this ability. A couple other units have it. some
A
of
lot
the
of the European sailors have this as well.
right. The grizzled veteran will give you this ability. The Iroquois and Fire on the Frontier get it too, since they've been fighting so much. So can be a good one if you like to go into melee. Another very rarely used one. In fact, no commander has it in the core book or LPSP Online is the Castilian special rule. It's on a commander, and this only applies to fortifications. It's kind of a cool rule, though. Any unit rally in the same fortification as its commander gets a -1 bonus to its resolve while rallying. So that can help, especially forces with subpar resolve like French or natives. They can get the resolve down to that more reliable 5 rather than 6. Several commanders have it in Fire on the Frontier, and you might see it pop up in the Raise the Black. Encourage you to play fortifications.
I'm gonna hop in here. We got two more rules that are specific to the Dutch. We have Zealanders, which makes it so if you're within 6 inches of an enemy, you roll one less dice when forced to take a fatigue check. So great, good for melee. And then you have the West India Company. That triggers when you start a turn and you have more strike points than you did on the previous turn. The entire force knocks off a single point of fatigue.
That's like a useful lead by example.
Yeah, it's like lead by example, but better.
Fail by example, and you win.
It is really useful. The Dutch are very good at taking fatigue off.
Yeah, they are.
And then we have, for the fighting men, we have the good old reliable grizzled veteran. He comes with, I believe it's tough and battle hardened, right?
Mhm.
And he's good. If I need to put him with a unit that I don't want to run away, that's who I tend to stick him with.
He has a command point to rally, which battle hard and tough, and a command point to rally means you can doctor 2 of your units every turn, basically.
Ooh.
He's so good that I've seen before the errata came out and limited characters to 1 per force. I saw forces that had this guy on every single unit.
Not a bad play. Really.
Now illegal.
So many grizzled veterans.
All grizzled.
The sailor version of the grizzled veteran is the Son of Neptune that has the same abilities, tough, and the rally for 3 inches away, but has expert sailors instead of battle hardened. It's useful if you really want a second grizzled veteran on a force. It can only be tied to units that have sailors, though. The other management, they kind of like come in a team. Fatigue management is the musician and also the standard bearer. The musician will have your opponent roll for tear at the beginning of a game, and the standard bearer gives your commander inspiring, which we already talked about. These two often come as a pair, or because it's a cheap upgrade for a commander to give them inspiring. And musician is a great way to control the game from the beginning by putting fatigue on your opponent. Tear, which is the ability that the musician or imitates, is also on Loanese and Asakumbai, as well as the Yamasi, Labuse, Vane, Blackbeard, Drummer Boy. Am I reading from the future here? Queen Danny. Lots of other future commanders will have Tear as well. And it's good. I enjoy Tear. You can only ever have your opponent roll 1 dice, even if you have a Tear and a musician on your side. But there are advantages to having both on the same starting force.
Corner cases. But yeah, Terror lets you start getting fatigue on your enemy from the very first turn, helping you get a good control of the game from the beginning. Especially if you can press the enemy from the very start. If you start a long ways away, sometimes they can just rally over the first turn and get rid of it all. Especially if they're defending and only have to sit there. But
or if they're in ships and you're too far away for cannons or muskets to be useful, then they just spend the first turn rallying everybody that they got a fatigue on them. Or if you're up against a whole tough group, it's like, well, my units just won't push this turn.
So there's a bunch of rules in the game that help you manage it, and that is a good clue that it is important. So I would recommend when you're building a force, have at least 2 of these rules present at some level. I mean, these are a wide variety of methods, so some of them are more important than others. So if you have very inspiring, that might be enough. But if you just have one unit with tough, probably not enough. You want a couple different ways, or at least one way to shed a good bit of fatigue to keep your force running smoothly.
You will sometimes run into a success bias when let's say you spend points on that commander with inspiring and a nice command range for inspiring, but then you get to the end of the game and you didn't have to inspire at all because your commander was telling people to shoot, and your units never really accumulated like more than 2 fatigue on them, or unless they went shaken. Like, if that happens, it just means that you're playing well, not that the inspiring wasn't there.
Right. If you can just kill all your enemy, then you're doing well. You don't need all this. But in general, it's good to have a way to keep your force working.
When things go bad. Yeah.
You also can push your units and give yourself fatigue, so sometimes you'll need to manage it even if it's not getting dumped on you. I realize there's another topic we should obviously cover that we should have covered earlier, and that is how do you do you leverage fatigue into a game-winning move, or how can you create a situation with fatigue that can turn the tide of the game? And there's a couple real obvious scenarios we should touch on real quick.
Having to run away from, and like especially making a command unit shaken, like will make your opponent almost lose their whole turn sometimes. If they're relying on using that command unit to give actions to units.
Yeah, if they can't rally that command unit, get it back in the game, that can be crippling.
Mm-hmm.
So getting a unit shaken is huge. The other key move that is just often decisive is if you can get 2 fatigue on an enemy and then get close enough, then you can charge them. One of the main ways to stop a charge is by keeping some guys loaded, so you can do a defensive fire and stop that incoming charge. If you have 2 fatigue, get a fatigue for taking that defensive shot, and you can never make yourself go shaken voluntarily. If you have 2 fatigue, you cannot take the defensive shot, which means you can charge without consequence, which means you're going to get beat up. So if you can put 2 fatigue on your enemy unit, get guys close enough to charge, you can go, and then as soon as if they already have 2 fatigue on them and you charge, they're pretty much guaranteed to go shaken, and you can get, if that's their command unit, that's even worse, but if you can just knock out a unit like that, that can be a huge winning move in the game. So
It's a fun little dance when you have a unit that you want to charge, and you want it to have 2 fatigue, but you don't want it to have 3 fatigue, but because then it will run away and make it so you can't charge it.
That's true. Yeah, that's happened to me before. Don't. Can you re-roll that fatigue?
Don't run away.
Come back.
The other great way to use this same system is when you have a gun crew on a ship that has loaded guns, but 1 or 2 fatigue on them. Hitting them with everything you can at the beginning of a turn or the end of a turn, when you see the shot coming, can make it so those cannons never fire. A unit that stands up can't shoot cannons that turn.
So they have to rally and then stand up and then shoot. Yeah, just disrupting a cannon crew can be huge, especially if you're on a tiny ship that will be turned to splinters by those medium guns in that sloop. If you can just stop that shot one more turn, and then they're down, and then they have to rally and have to stand up, and you shoot them again, you can control the game if you can stop the
It can be
cannons.
great. Also, sometimes you want to make a unit move. That's a good way to pile fatigue on there. This is what you'd usually use with your poison arrows when a unit's trying to get close to you and you don't want them to, and because most people do not go prone against natives, piling fatigue on a unit and making them run away is a great way to have that unit lose its positioning, maybe drive it out of cover, because when a unit runs away, they always have to run directly away from the unit that caused the attack.
Yeah.
So sometimes that pushes a unit out of cover, so you can take advantage of that with another unit that's flanking that unit.
That's a nasty move. That's me.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen a lot, but it's something to think about when you want to kind of pile up bad on top of bad with fatigue.
So the other part of it is what helps get fatigue on your enemy? Because we were talking about managing fatigue on you, but you also want to put fatigue on the enemy. So there are some really nasty special rules to help with that. Expertly drilled usually comes with professional soldiers. It makes them roll an extra dice if you shoot with that dedicated shoot action per expertly drilled. I believe that's only activated on a spade or a heart.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So again, you just did a dedicated shoot action. So if you kill 2 guys, they're rolling 3 dice. Sound possibility going shaken.
Yeah. If there's 2 units on a deck, then they're rolling 2 extra dice. It's really fun.
And then we got poisoned arrows, which are just nasty. Did you want to explain those, Joseph? You're a native player.
Oh, it's my favorite. Yeah. Poison arrows, and when you shoot somebody with them, they have to reroll 1 successful fatigue dice. I love this. It's the South American tribes can use poison arrows, one of my favorite factions, but it's sure me nasty to play against. It's easy to pour out so much fatigue with these guys. Nasty part about this too is you can't re-roll your fatigue checks because you've already re-rolled it once, and the way the game works, you can't re-roll a dice more than once. So these guys are very reliable at pouring out fatigue and crippling their enemies. Apparently nobody likes poison. Warcry is another native rule. Actually, it's going to come in on the pirates too and raise the black.
Yar.
Where when you charge somebody, they have to take, kind of like expertly drilled, after you do that charge, they have to take an extra resolve check backwards from battle hardened. So if you take 1 casualty, you'll take 3 fatigue checks instead of 2, which is normal, or 1 with battle hardened.
It helps eliminate units that are charged because with the Native Americans, they never want to be in melee.
Yeah, they're
Extended melee.
melee save is really bad. So if they can hit hard, just hit once and shake that unit or eliminate it. That's really what they need to do. Same thing with pirates. Their melee save isn't very good either.
Shooting multiple arrows is kind of the same thing as targeting a unit like that. You're just giving that unit more resolve checks, or more fatigue tests to do. Arrows are not very killy at the best of times, so having a unit roll against your arrow thing twice is usually you're just trying to accumulate fatigue on that unit. Arrows are going to hit a lot of the time because the units that have arrows usually have a 6 shoot or a 5 shoot. The kind of double-edged sword about this is that when you shoot twice in 1 turn, it gives them a point of fatigue, and if you shoot 3 times, that's 2 points of fatigue. So you need to couple the intent of shooting multiple times with being able to rally those fatigue away.
Right. But sometimes it's worth it to give fatigue to yourself to cripple a key enemy unit. That can be, but sometimes I've done this where I shoot, miss, shoot, no fatigue, and I end up giving myself fatigue and the enemy none. But
Yeah.
that's annoying. It's happened a lot of times, actually. Maybe I'm too aggressive, but if you can use a small unit to slow down or cripple a big unit, that can be key. Another weird thing related to this is shooting multiple times instead of once. You can do a half shot, then reload, then do another half shot rather than doing a full shot. And that technically makes the enemy roll more fatigue dice because, again, when you're hit, you have to roll 1. Or damage, you got to roll 1. So say you get hit and lose 1 casualty, you got to roll 2 dice. And then you get hit again, you got to get 1 casualty. That's 2 dice. That's 4 dice instead of the 3 if you got hit with a full shot and got 2 casualties. But again, that gives you fatigue as well. So again, a double-edged sword. Another corner case for this is the broadside special rule. If you do all your cannons at once, then all those casualties get applied once. But if you shoot individually, you can actually make the enemy roll more fatigue checks, possibly giving them more fatigue. So it's not always clear which one you should use, but it is a fun tactical choice you have to try to manipulate how the fatigue is laid out.
Especially if you set up a raking shot, because then you're making every single unit on that ship basically roll a fatigue check.
That's true.
For every shot, yeah. Now, you will see shooting multiple times. It's one of the best reasons to have veteran Boucanet or veteran Fleabouses or freebooters, is they can shoot twice if they don't start when they reload markers on a spade.
Yeah, that's right.
So Boucanet is doing a full double shot in 1 turn for 1 fatigue.
Whew.
on a spade. It's pretty powerful.
It's gonna hurt somebody.
Yeah. So it still is. I think it's a little bit more effective than multiple arrows,
Oh yeah,
but it's also harder to accomplish.
yeah, because you got reloads to deal with, and you can't control this. But if your enemy has the Sound of Thunder special rule, and you shoot them with guns, they're going to get tons of fatigue too. Some of the natives don't appreciate getting shot with thunder sticks. They take extra fatigue check dice every time they get shot with guns, and they're resolved typically bad. So there's a couple native factions that nobody really likes to play because of that.
Timid too. We should mention timid.
Oh yeah,
It's a great way to you take Ungage and they will pile fatigue on themselves.
Every time one of their buddies gets shot at, they whimper a little bit. Take a fatigue check.
Never run them on a ship. They're a great unit on land, and as long as you keep all friendly units 6 inches away.
Yeah, it's hard to remember that rule. Timid. It's weird. I think it's only on the one unit though.
Yeah, only on Ungage. Sound of Thunder is also on civilians.
Yeah.
So you'd have fun with that, and they're rolling 7 resolve. So let's talk about some rules, some special rules that take advantage of fatigue. Now, the first one is the Spanish one that comes to mind, Ruthless. If you've ever played the Spanish or played against the Spanish players are always asking, how much fatigue is on that unit? How much fatigue is on that unit? Oh, I need to rally my guys with my commander because I have 2 fatigue.
Yeah, Ruthless, you get a bonus to your shoot score if you're targeting somebody with more fatigue than you. So you want to do all these things to keep fatigue off your units and fatigue on your enemy units, so you get your bonus and can actually function as a Spanish player.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun that you have to manage it. It does hurt a little bit that Ruthless is really not as effective a lot of the time against factions that have great fatigue management built in, or players who have invested a lot in fatigue management. Playing against units that save on 6, that are elusive, and have a very inspiring means that Ruthless is never going off. Stop trying.
Got to win more for the Spanish, yeah.
Yeah.
Cold-blooded is a rule you'll see on a lot of several commanders that just gives that unit Ruthless and any unit that they use a command point on Ruthless for that turn too. So it's just kind of like actually it used to be called Ruthless Commander, now it's called Cold-blooded. I like that. It gives your commander some character and kind of makes you think about your command units turn a little different. I like that.
The other controls or the things that take advantage of fatigue is the control zone. Units that are shaken lose their control zone, so you can get close to them without having to charge. It's interesting in a way, but
yeah, it's a weird little perk. We already talked about the terror and the musician. That terror or musician ability can set you up to trigger your Ruthless or your other fatigue layering effects. Really good rule for the Spanish to actually use. This can look like a kind of a dry discussion. Hope you aren't bored or lost interest already, but you can look at the game through this lens, and if you can control the game, you win. If you can manipulate fatigue, you can control the game. So I see this as a pretty a major topic if you want to play the game well, and I like messing with these rules and try to layer things on top of each other. We just reviewed Piet Hein, and he has like 4 fatigue management skills, which just keeps his force going forever. But if you see a French militia force that has 6 resolve everywhere with no abilities, you can kind of just pin them down and they're hardly functional. So it makes a big difference in the game how effective your force can be. Good thing to think about, good thing to consider while you're list building. Any final thoughts, guys?
Yeah, a lot of the time I used to think of fatigue racked up on units as a kind of booby prize for not killing anything. Like, oh, they made all their saves, but they got 1 fatigue on them. I now look at it as like you were mentioning, another thing that you get to control and in fact the game. Some forces want to control fatigue on themselves or their opponents a lot. And by using fatigue to your advantage in simple ways, like if everybody has tough, I always push the first turn because the second turn, that fatigue will melt off. So you can, if you're not being engaging with the opponent, pushing every other turn is huge for a lot of units, and it really lets you control the battlefield.
I've done that with the unknown African a lot. Dominant.
Yeah,
Push all the time.
pushing every turn,
Might as well.
having a unit that always gets 3 actions, even on a heart or a diamond, or if they're veteran, even a spade. It's nice going first and getting to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
So, and fatigue, like you said, it's not sexy. It's not shooting something, but it's a fun part of the game, I think, because it represents how hard these people that we're pretending we're representing on the battlefield are working at the time.
How disciplined they are, how effective they are on the battlefield.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you kill them, it's all running away, right?
Yeah, I would argue that fatigue is more important than killing half the time. I mean, I had a portion where I had a bunch of filibusters and I shot from point blank range and was unable to score any kills and got no fatigue. And then my enemy shot me from point blank range, caused me to go to fatigue 2, which then prevented me from defensive firing. So I would argue that the casualties are the booby prize. The real prize is fatigue.
Fatigue comes right before the big prize of killing everybody.
I think that about wraps it up, though.
For more Blood and Plunder articles about fatigue, lots of articles about fatigue. No, lots of articles about tactics and strategies. You can go over to bloodandpigment.com and check out lots of articles there. We have articles on ships and nations and factions, terrain building, painting guides, strategy articles, battle reports. Check it out there.
Check out the rest of our YouTube channel as well. We'll be aiming to put out a video every Monday. Subscribe and ring the ship's bell so you can stay notified of our uploads.
And as always, keep your dice ready to win at your back, your heart.